We begin this hour with newly released transcripts of two of President Trump's very first calls with world leaders. One of them is a conversation with Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. According to the transcript released by the Washington Post, the president said, quote, "Look, I spoke to Putin, Merkel, Abe of Japan, to France today, and this was the most unpleasant call because I will be honest with you, I hate taking these people," an apparent reference to refugees. And in his call with Mexico's president, Mr. Trump urged President Enrique Peña Nieto to end his public criticism of the president's proposed border wall. Mr. Trump also reportedly said, quote, "We have the drug lords in Mexico that are knocking the hell out of our country. Up in New Hampshire, I won New Hampshire because New Hampshire is a drug-infested den. So we have a lot of problems with Mexico, farther than the economic problem." Greg Miller is a national security correspondent for the Washington Post, and he is the reporter who obtained these transcripts. So, Greg, thank you so much for joining us. There's a lot to unpack here. A lot was discussed. So the first question, I suppose, to you is what stood out the most?
Well, I think the thing that stood out to me the most is just how he treats the issue of the border wall with Mexico and his campaign pledge to make Mexico pay for it, because this was just a signature line in so many of these rallies. And here he is in the very first days of his administration, basically acknowledging that that idea is really not going to go anywhere and trying to enlist the Mexican president in a kind of a side deal to help him maintain that fiction for the public. Really pressuring Peña Nieto, stop saying you're not going to pay for the wall. I can't live with that. I can't handle that. You got to stop saying that. Right. The money's going to come from somewhere else. We'll work that all out, but you got to stop talking about it.
Right. He says something to the effect of that it'll all work out in the wash. But and he also says, you know, this may not be the biggest issue we deal with, but politically, it's really important.
Yeah, he's acknowledging that he's sort of cornered himself politically. All of his pledges that Mexico is going to pay for this wall, now all of a sudden he's president. He has to figure out a way to make that happen. It's not clear even now, 6 months later, that that is going to happen. And so at the time, he's trying to find a way to suppress that issue, to knock that down, to get the Mexican president to stop calling attention to it and stop speaking so defiantly.
Yeah, and it almost sort of sounds, in reading the transcript, that, you know, he doesn't have much to sort of hold over Peña Nieto's head in regards to getting him to stop talking about that, but he kind of is threatening a trade war, it sounded like to me.
Absolutely. He's referring to, I'm going to pose, I want to slap tariffs on your country, 15%, 25%, 35%. But you're right. I mean, ultimately, the language is basically kind of an appeal, a real pressure play. You got to stop playing with this. He threatens to cut off contact with Mexico if the Mexican president keeps saying publicly that Mexico won't pay for the wall, which of course is what the Mexican president has to say. Right,
of course, yeah. And, you know, we read one of the clips there from the transcript where he's talking about the Mexican drug lords, and he brings up New Hampshire. Senator Maggie Hassan was not very happy with those comments, and she already fired back against the president about what he had to say. There's her tweet right there. Donald Trump's comments about New Hampshire are disgusting. As he knows, New Hampshire and states across America have a substance misuse crisis, and she goes on. Do you expect there will be sort of more fallout from these transcripts?
I think so. I mean, I think that you touched on one already. In that call with the Mexican president, he describes New Hampshire as a drug-infested den. That's why I won New Hampshire. Of course, he didn't win New Hampshire in the general election, but he did win the Republican primary there. And so this is just a weird case in which the president of the United States is speaking derisively about one of his states, one of the 50 United States, to a foreign leader in a way to cast a reflective glow back on him and his political success.
I want to talk a little bit about the Prime Minister of Australia and the conversation there, but I also found it very interesting, and I know it was shortly after the president took office, but you do hear sort of echoes of his campaign speeches, like the wall, but also sort of reminding Peña Nieto of his crowd size and things that we've seen him sort of repeatedly go back to reinforce his position.
Yeah, in fact, the undercurrents of both these calls is really sort of his overriding concern in these conversations It does not appear to be the policies that they are debating, does not appear to be the relationships between these governments, or let alone the plight of refugees or immigrants. It is the Trump brand, how any of these issues reflects on him personally.
Mm-hmm. So let us talk about the conversation he had with Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. At the time, when it was sort of leaked, things were leaked about the nature of this conversation, and it was leaked that they didn't have a very good conversation. The White House pushed back on that characterization, but we see that things were sort of tense. And just to read one portion of it, the president says, "Does anybody know?" And he's talking about this agreement to take refugees from Australia. That was an agreement that was hammered out by the previous administration. Does anybody know who these people are? Who are they? Where do they come from? Are they going to become the Boston bomber in 5 years or 2 years? Who are these people? And Malcolm Turnbull sort of pushes back and says, listen, you know, if you accept these people, what you're going to come across as is a man who keeps his word. And the president clearly sort of disagrees with that characterization. What do you make of that conversation?
I mean, it's just a complete disconnect between two people who look at the world and look at the U.S.-Australia relationship from completely different lenses. Malcolm Turnbull is trying to emphasize, look, Australia's been there for the United States, and in fact, Australia has fought alongside the United States in almost every conflict for over a century. And Trump is worried about the moment. He's worried about that particular minute where he is forced to swallow a deal that his predecessor reached that will make him look bad politically, and he's trying to find a way out of it.
Yeah. What do you make of his negotiating abilities here? These are the first phone calls, and they're meaty. They get right into some delicate issues, and he's the grand negotiator.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because he sort of veers in multiple directions in these calls. At one moment with Peña Nieto, he's like really badgering him, pressuring him, and then in another he's kind of sweet-talking him. If you go along with me, maybe we'll go down in history as, you know, the fathers of our country, or at least almost. And so he's looking sort of for something that sticks. He is not making arguments of policy or ideas, right? These are very sort of personal, political, and he mixes threats with blandishment.
Right. Yeah, I thought to myself, you know, the people who have supported Donald Trump, I think will probably like what they read. I mean, he's not really sort of backing down from some key issues, but there is a bit of dancing here and there as well. It's 6 months on now. How would we characterize the relationship that the president has with these two leaders? This was this was early days.
Well, you're right. I mean, these were sort of, when these calls happened, they were really explosive. It was just our first glimpse and a sort of an early indication that the Trump you saw campaigning was not going to be toned down, even when it came to conversations with close U.S. allies. Mm-hmm. He was going to continue to be bombastic, volatile, unpredictable, and sometimes destructive. These relationships, you know, they've sort of stabilized. I think that Turnbull has joked about Trump publicly at Trump's expense in some cases. And Peña Nieto has, they've both met with Trump now face to face. And White House officials say that those conversations have been productive. Yeah. But I don't think either one of them is under the, you know, the idea that they have a stable relationship with the U.S. president in the way that they might have had with George W. Bush or President Obama. You
know, I also thought something was sort of interesting in the conversation with Peña Nieto, the repeated bringing up of Jared Kushner, that he repeats over and over again, you know, I really didn't want to have any of these meetings. I just wanted to sort of institute a tax policy or a tariff policy, but Jared convinced me to have these meetings.
Yeah, he's trying. In that instance, it seems like he's trying to do a good cop, bad cop thing. I don't want anything to do with you, Mexico. I'm only dealing with you or even talking to you because Jared, my son-in-law, insists that he can work something out. So I'm going to let that play out, but just keep in mind that I'm here at the top job and I can pull the plug at any moment.
Yeah, I agree with you. Greg Miller from the Washington Post, thank you so much. I encourage people to go to the Washington Post and read these transcripts for yourself. Not only are the transcripts there, but there's sort of background information to help you understand the context so you understand what these leaders are talking about. Great work. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.